So with that kind of just real brief introduction, I'm going to hand the program over to our first panel on decarbonization pro bono opportunities. And this panel will discuss efforts to develop recommendations on decarbonizing the US economy as outlined in the book, Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization in the US. And their efforts to turn those recommendations into model laws. The panel will also talk about opportunities for others to get involved. For that panel, I'm going to hand things over to John C. Dernbach, and he is the Commonwealth Professor of Environmental Law and Sustainability at Widener University Commonwealth Law School in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and the director of that school's Environmental Law and Sustainability Center. And he's written extensively on sustainable development, climate change, and many other topics. So John, I'm going to hand the Zoom floor to you, and thank you for this first set of panelists and all our panelists today for being here. Really appreciate it and excited to hear your presentation and for your work on this. Really invaluable. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Michelle. As Michelle indicated, I'm going to be moderating today's program, and I wanted to thank Michelle, Doug, and others for your invitation to join your program today. You've all seen President Biden's commitment yesterday to have the U.S. reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% from 2005 levels by 2030. You also know that we need to get to net zero or below by 2050, if not earlier, to avoid the worst effects of climate change. Achieving the necessary cuts will require a fundamental reshaping of the economy, a process known as deep decarbonization. The book that Michelle mentioned, The Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization in the United States, is a book that Michael Gerrard and I co-edited. Our contributing authors recommended over 1,000 legal actions to advance deep decarbonization at the federal, state, and local levels and in private governance. But our idea was that we didn't want the book to simply sit on the shelf. So we organized a pro bono team of lawyers to turn these recommendations into proposed model laws. And as Michelle indicated, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Our purpose is not just to describe the project, although that's important, but also we want to encourage you to consider participating in it. Our project furthers an American Bar Association resolution that was adopted in 2019. It urges lawyers to engage in pro bono activities to aid efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change. It also urges lawyers to advise their clients on the risks and opportunities that climate change provides. Our book project, the Legal Pathways project that we're going to be talking about today, is also one of 2 projects now endorsed by the Pro Bono program of the ABA. Now, you're going to hear from a bunch of speakers today. As Michelle said, we're going to explain the book, explain our project and how it works, and explain how you can get involved. Then we'll take questions. If you have questions along the way or at the end, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to put them there. Our first speaker is my colleague and friend, Michael Gerrard, who directs the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia University Law School. Michael?
Thank you very much, John. So let me share my screen here. There we go. So about 8 years ago, a project was launched under the auspices of the UN to come up with pathways for the 16 largest emitting countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. One of the outputs of that was this book, Pathways to Deep Decarbonization in the United States, which came out in 2014. There are four pillars of these pathways of radically moving away from fossil fuels and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The first of these is electricity decarbonization, ending the use of coal to generate electricity, phasing out the use of natural gas, substituting renewables, mostly wind and solar, but also hydro and geothermal and other renewables. The second pillar is energy efficiency, making the economy as energy efficient as possible. The third is electrification, moving away from direct uses of fossil fuels toward electricity, led by the transport sector. phasing out internal combustion engines for motor vehicles to electric vehicles, converting the heating of buildings and the cooling and cooking and so forth to electricity. And the fourth is carbon capture, is capturing the carbon dioxide at the power plants or industrial facilities before it gets into the atmosphere, and also drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The technical report said it was very important to avoid emissions dead ends, and the principal dead end would be increasing the use of natural gas. U.S. greenhouse gas emissions have been declining over the last decade, in large part because of the fracking boom that made natural gas cheaper and more available. And so we have a lot of coal plants shutting down and replaced by natural gas, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions. But natural gas itself is a fossil fuel. It has emissions both at the combustion point and also in leakage. So converting to natural gas would not be the way to go. The technical report also assumes that we'll continue to have the existing very high levels of electricity reliability. It assumes that we're only going to use technology that is already commercial or near commercial. It assumes continued economic growth and population growth. The technical study also assumes that people do not have to get rid of vehicles or appliances earlier than they would otherwise, but when they do replace them, they should be efficient electric appliances. And so the study reflects how often things are replaced. So it goes out to 2050. So lighting might ordinarily be replaced 4 times during that period, hot water heating 3 times, light duty vehicles twice, and so forth. But all this is built into the model. So John Dernbach and I were at an environmental lawyers conference some years ago, and we both admired this report. And we thought that it would be useful to figure out how does US law, federal, state, and local, as well as private governance, need to change in order for the US to be on the pathways that are set forth in this technical report. As he indicated, we recruited about 50 lawyers around the country, mostly law professors, all of us working pro bono, to write a book that has in tremendous detail what laws would be needed, what changes would be needed. So this is the book. It's about 1,200 pages. It was published in 2019 by the Environmental Law Institute. And we also came out with this much shorter abridged version, which is available for free download on the Environmental Law Institute website. The key findings of the book are that there are legal tools that are available or could be devised, more than 1,000, or actually more than 1,500 specific recommendations. Some of these recommendations are regulations, some of them are subsidies, some of them are permitting reform, some of them are information and disclosure, a whole variety of measures. And most of these measures, in addition to reducing greenhouse gases, also have other benefits. They reduce conventional air pollution that makes people sick. They very often will create jobs. They have other benefits. So in terms of what's in the book, it's divided into several parts. This is the first part I'll talk about. Each of these bullet points is a chapter. So a part of the book on energy efficiency, conservation, and fuel switching. So a chapter that gets into the details of the regulation of the emissions and fuel economy of light duty vehicles, of automobiles and SUVs, and how that ought to change in order to be on this deep decarbonization pathway. And I should say that most of the things we're talking about here are entirely consistent with the plans with the goals that President Biden announced yesterday at his climate summit. So we have a chapter on heavy duty vehicles and freight, a chapter on transportation demand and mode shifting to try to get more people out of single occupancy vehicles, chapters on aviation and shipping, lighting, appliances, and other equipment, which is one area where there's a tremendous amount of potential, as many of the others have. A chapter on retrofitting old buildings, which is a particular challenge. chapter on new buildings and one on the industrial sector. The next section concerns electricity decarbonization, so that's utility scale renewables, distributed renewables like rooftop solar, transmission, distribution, and storage, nuclear, hydropower, and legal tools for phasing out fossil fuels in the electricity sector. The next section concerned fuel decarbonization. We're not going to be able to electrify everything. We're still going to need some liquid fuels and some gaseous fuels for certain applications. And for those, we would want to have bioenergy fuels, have not fossil fuels, but fuels that come from plants. And so we get into a lot of detail on how that would work in this section. The next part is about carbon capture and negative emissions, carbon capture, sequestration, and utilization, capturing the material at the power plants and the factories before it goes up to stack, direct air capture from the atmosphere, and then the very important roles that agriculture and forestry can play in removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it. Then there are a number of carbon pollutants, of climate pollutants other than carbon dioxide that are important: black carbon, methane, fluorinated gases, and nitrous oxides. And we talk about legal tools that can be used to reduce each of these. And finally, there are a number of cross-cutting approaches to reducing emissions. Carbon pricing, we talk about how carbon pricing of some kind could be a very important part of the picture. It won't solve everything. Even if we have carbon pricing, we need more things, but we think carbon pricing would be very useful. Ways to alter individual behavior, legal tools to foster technological innovation, methods of financing these large-scale projects that are necessary, methods of financing much smaller projects that are also necessary. Then we also talk about materials consumption and solid waste. And finally, tools to reduce the barriers that international trade uses could impose to encourage all of this. So as John said, we didn't want this just to sit on the shelf. We wanted to start up a project that would involve the drafting of the model laws that are recommended by the book. And fortunately, Rick Horsch, who had just retired as an environmental partner at the law firm of White and Case in New York, volunteered to take on the formidable task of supervising the whole pro bono drafting project. And I'm now going to turn it over to Rick.
Well, thank you, Michael. I will provide an overview of the project. I'll also discuss the drafting process, and most importantly, I'll describe how lawyers, you, can participate in the project. Can we put up the first slide, please? Next page. Thank you. As Michael explained, each chapter of the book, there are recommendations for actions that legislators can take to address climate change, and those actions can be at the federal level, the state level, the county level, and the local levels. On average, each chapter has about 35 to 40 recommendations, and I have set out on this slide some examples of recommendations for legal actions that come directly from the book. There are hundreds of recommendations for actions that states can take, and I've listed three of those actions there on the slide. There are also hundreds of recommendations that cities can take, and I've listed at the bottom of the slide an example of an action that can be taken by cities. Next slide, please. There are also hundreds of actions listed that can be taken by local governments, and here are a couple of those actions. And then finally, actions by private actors I've listed one example there. For example, companies with high shipping volumes, such as Walmart, could impose supply chain requirements, such as moving their goods on ships that meet a certain efficiency standard, use low carbon fuel, or some other process such as slow steam. Next slide, please. And the project, as Michael indicated, aims to turn recommendations into model laws that can be adopted by legislators with some tweaking on their part to adapt the laws to their particular jurisdiction. And when I say model laws, what I mean to include are legislation, regulation, best practices, standard operating procedures, model lease provisions, private party agreements, and similar such laws. The type and scope is quite broad, and really this is the core of the project. We want to bring these recommendations to life in the form of model laws. I should mention that each draft of the model law goes through a peer review process before it is made available to policymakers, and you're going to hear more about that process, the peer review process, from Marcy Kahn. Next slide, please. The project has a website. This serves as a central location for the model documents and allows policymakers and other potential users to access the documents. The website was launched in April 2020. I have put the website address here on the slide, www.lpdd.org. Just as an aside, the website also has links to more than 2,000 existing laws that address climate change and that have been adopted by various jurisdictions. So it can serve as a good resource for legislators and other policymakers who are looking to see what other jurisdictions have done. A final step in the project is reaching out to policymakers to ensure that there's a demand for the model legal documents and that they will be adopted. We're actively reaching out and connecting with policymakers at all levels of government to let them know that this resource is available, to get their views and to get feedback. We have a committee that has been assembled that is coordinating that effort, and you will be hearing more about the outreach effort this morning from Karla Perri. Next slide, please. Here is a diagram of the process of preparing the model legal documents. A lawyer will first look at the recommendations, decide which recommendation or recommendations to take to turn into a model law, consult with us, consult with the authors of the chapter where that's appropriate to really decide which is the best for you as an attorney or a law firm to take responsibility for. The second step is we ask the drafters to prepare for each recommendation that they've chosen a short 1 to 2 page document. If we call it a template, it really summarizes the recommendation. What is the type of legal document that will be drafted? Is it a local ordinance? Is it a state law? Is it an amendment to an existing law? The next step is to actually do the drafting. Once we have a draft that is sort of ready for prime time, we put it through the peer review process. That process can be is typically a two-way process. The peer reviewer will review it, get back to the drafter with comments, and there's typically a back and forth between the peer reviewer and the drafter. Once the document is finalized and the peer review process is over, we post it on our website. Next slide, please. What I've tried to outline here is to illustrate is an overview of the total project. So at the top, documents are prepared. The document is then posted on the website. The documents are made available on the website directly to legislators and other policymakers, or indirectly to NGOs, law firms, and other what I call intermediaries, or just organizations or people who have contact with legislators. We've found that in many cases, it's NGOs who have the thumb on the pulse of what legislators and policymakers are looking for. We're making this a two-way process. We are getting feedback from policymakers as to the type of documents they're looking for, and also from NGOs. Next slide, please. So where are we today? Today, we have more than 24 law firms and a good number of individual attorneys, law professors, retired judges who are participating on a pro bono basis. We currently have nearly 40 model laws that have been drafted, peer-reviewed, and available on the website. So how can you participate? Next slide. If you're a law firm, we've seen law firms take responsibility for an entire chapter or topic, and then work to select the recommendations that they're going to be drafting and actually draft the legal documents. Other firms and individual lawyers have decided that that's a bit more than they're going to be responsible for, and they've just taken one or two recommendations from a chapter. That's fine, and take responsibility for that recommendation or topic or recommendations, and take responsibility for those. Although a number of recommendations and chapters have been claimed by law firms or lawyers, we still have a number available. So if you are interested, please let us know. There's a number of interesting recommendations out there that are still available. Other firms, we have had law firms with senior lawyers with deep expertise in various subjects, and they have acted as peer reviewers. Other lawyers at law firms have contacts with legislatures, and they have been assisting in outreach. Next slide, please. If you're an individual attorney, in-house counsel, law professor, you can also get involved either in drafting, in peer reviewing, or in outreach, depending on your various qualifications and interests. Next slide, please. We also have NGOs who have gotten involved. Some of those are playing the same role as law firms, assisting in drafting or peer review, and many are contributing with outreach and participation in outreach. Next slide, please. Here is my contact information. Please feel free to contact me if you'd like to get involved. I've also listed here the website link. Please, you'll see that there are, on the website is contact information for those who would like to, if you'd like to get involved. So the next person will be Marcy Kahn to tell you about peer review. Marcy is a retired justice of the New York Supreme Court Appellate Division, First Department. So take it away, Marcy.
Thank you, Rick. The peer review process of the LPDD implementation project is designed to ensure that the work product that we post on our website is of the highest possible quality. So who are these peer reviewers? Well, we've recruited more than 40 experts in the various pathway fields you've heard described by Michael and as set forth in the book, each of whom has deep involvement in their fields and have volunteered to serve as peer reviewers of the drafted model documents. They include law professors, industry lawyers, financial experts, climate advocates from NGOs, present and former government officials, engineers, and a number of the chapter authors themselves. As you've heard, all of these folks are working pro bono. So what are the specific goals of peer review? Well, we have 4 principal guidelines. First, we follow the recommendations of the LPDD book, Michael and John's book, which in turn, as you've heard, follows the recommendations of the US Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project. We are not generally asking peer reviewers or drafters to propose new policies that don't appear in the book. There's an exception, though, where the drafters and/or the peer reviewers feel that an alternative must be explored. When they come to that conclusion, the alternative may be added to the presentation and compared with the original proposal. Second, we strive for proposals which have a significant impact on decarbonization. Third, we seek to offer proposals which have some political viability as legislation. We do not want to recommend options which have been repeatedly rejected or thoroughly overtaken by market or political events. Peer reviewers are encouraged to take a common sense approach, finally, and work toward enhancing the proposal as provided by the drafter. We discourage efforts by the peer reviewers to reinvent the wheel. As Professor Dernbach says in the introduction to the book, the objective is not to identify the one best legal approach or set of approaches, but to identify the broadest possible range of approaches to deep decarbonization so that public and private decision makers can better understand the wide range of available choices and can choose those legal pathways that they believe are appropriate or feasible. So how does the peer review process work? We have adopted a protocol for the peer review process. It provides that upon completion of the drafting process, the drafter sends the following documents to the project coordinator of drafting, that's Rick Horsch, and the coordinator of peer review, that's me. Here are the documents. First, the draft model legislation. Second, for more complex measures, we'd like an annotated version of the draft model legislation explaining how each section fits within the overall policy scheme and how it differs from existing or pending legislation. And finally, we like a legal memorandum discussing the legal background for the legislation and making the case for its adoption. After the coordinator's review, the documents are then assigned for peer review. In some instances, we may have more than one individual doing the peer reviewing. We encourage peer reviewers and drafters to communicate directly, as Rick has explained to you, during the peer review process. Occasionally, we've asked the peer reviewer to assist in the drafting process. And when we've done that, actually the result has been a more viable proposal. And so also it reduces the need for an intensive peer review after the completion of the drafting process. Virtually universally, the working relationships between the peer reviewers and the drafters have been very collegial. Where peer reviewers and drafters have been of strongly divergent views, however, the coordinator of drafting and the coordinator of peer review get involved and help resolve the conflicts. Once we have an agreed product, we give it a final review and submit it for posting on the LPDD website. We also keep our outreach team informed of the proposals, which will soon be published as they are in the pipeline. So that's the peer review process. Please volunteer, bring your expertise and join us. We'd love to have you. I'm now going to turn the program over to Karla Perri, who is an environmental lawyer from the Spectrum Group, who is a member of our outreach team, and she's going to explain that process to you. Karla?
Great, thank you so much, Marcy. Hello, everyone. The outreach team consists of myself, Joe DeMona, and Joel Stronberg. We're all environmental attorneys with a lot of experience in both energy and environment. And most of us have worked on policy matters our entire careers. What's really interesting and fun about the outreach effort is that we're talking to activists, we're talking to people that want to accomplish something. And our goal, as everyone has really stated, is to get something to happen. It's to get legislation not just shared, but moved forward and enacted. What we've learned through this process is that people want to do something about climate at the state level, at the local level. They know that federal leaders are doing a lot of legislation in that area, but they're trying to figure out how whatever they do at the state level or the local level supports what the federal government's doing, differs from what the federal government's doing, and is unique. And we're trying to help sort through that as we talk to people. We've probably talked to over 150 different individuals from the national nonprofits to a large group of religious leaders. I think there's 200 different groups in the religious organization alone. And we've spoken with a lot of individuals, specifically at Orange County, California, where they're very active in looking at climate change issues, but also really trying to keep a focus on business and growing the economy. So when we talk to people, the feedback we give to our drafters and peer reviewers is to kind of ask them, what will be the economic effect of what they're proposing? Because that matters to the legislators at the state and local level significantly. If there's a way to talk about jobs and what jobs might be created, if there's a way to talk about environmental justice and have that as part of the rationale and supporting information, that's very helpful to helping a legislator understand how to move forward. Our process has really been talking and making connections, and we connect our connections with other connections, and then we get feedback. We have a massive call list, we do routine check-ins, and what we've also learned is that there's a lot of analysis and research going into the various topics addressed in the book. In the case, for example, of electric vehicles, there's a lot of new reports coming out on charging, rapid charging, universal charging, and what some of the issues are in locating charging stations. And so as we learn that, we then go back to the drafters and peer reviewers and ask if there's specific things they could add to support those issues. The outreach effort is one where we need more support and much more help. So if you are at a firm or you personally support anyone that's in office, we welcome your analysis as far as how we can help you work with them. And we encourage you to look at the website, which Jordan's going to go over, reach out to us and tell us how we can support you in your efforts. And now I'm going to turn this over to Jordan Gerow. Jordan's a New York attorney and manages our website and is probably the person outside of John and Michael with the most detailed knowledge of the topic areas. Jordan?
Howdy, thank you. I'm going to share screen, I hope, so that we can look at this resource together. And I hope folks are now seeing lpdd.org. Somebody stop me if you're not. So this is the website. As Rick alluded to, we keep our model laws here, but we also have identified over 2,000 different resources along 292 different pathways where we house external resources, laws that other jurisdictions have passed, model laws that other organizations have published, and in some cases, white papers or think pieces that outline what the next step might be where there doesn't exist a model law. So all of these resources are organized along the pathways that are identified in the book that John and Michael edited. So if you were to try to find your way through our resources from the top down, we would identify them by pathway. Up here in the top corner of the screen, you see 8 sort of umbrella pathways, mostly identifying sectors. So we have buildings and industry, transportation, electricity, fuel, negative emissions, other pollutants, as well as Michael covered, different cross-cutting approaches to reducing emissions in context. So if one were to click through, say, on transportation, you'd see that our subcategories here directly match the chapters of this book. So transportation demand is chapter 13, light duty vehicles is chapter 14, and all of our resources that address these different areas should be housed under these links. So under light duty vehicles, for example, we have a brief synopsis of what goes on in the chapter. And then we have our subtopics. So vehicle fee bates, equitable access to electric vehicles, like where we're building charging stations. Expanding vehicle charging and refueling infrastructure is a subtopic we have a comparatively large number of resources on. So we find here some of the recommendations directly from the text, and then we find a list of our actual resources. We always, because we are the most proud of the model laws that our team of pro bono lawyers have put together, we always try to sort these to the top. So you can see the first things that pop up are our own model laws, and here's a state tax credit for EV charging stations. A brief description of what the model law is attempting to do, and then a couple different formats in which you can download and view it. So that is the architecture from a very high level. If you're looking for another way to cut through our resources, you can use our search function. That will allow you to filter by pathway or topic. You can also search by jurisdiction, Congress, executive branch, local governments, states, etc. Or by location. If you know you're looking for something from California or from a particular state, we let you search by that as well. Because we've heard, wow, 2,000 resources is a lot to try to comb through or try to wrap our heads around. We've also been putting out more recently lists of top resources in various categories. So we will have a brief one-pager if you're just trying to get your head around a section, or if you perhaps know a legislator or an NGO that's interested in one particular topic and you'd like to share a one-pager that kind of goes into what are some of the top resources that LPDD has in this area. We have some of these that we've condensed down to a single page. And you see, they're not all ours. IREC, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, for example, has some great shared renewables resources. So we identify other organizations, legislation, and then actual legislation from real jurisdictions. The last thing I want to show you is how to stay in touch with us. Everybody that you're seeing on this webinar today is going to be listed on our contact page, if appropriate, of course. We have contact for drafting, peer review, outreach, and even if folks from different law schools want to try to get involved in some capacity, we talk about how you can do that. And then everybody's contact is at the bottom of that page. So that's how you can navigate our website, see what we have, and hopefully get back in touch with us. And with that, I believe I'll be turning it over to Romany Webb, who is a senior fellow at the Sabin Center and has been both a chapter author and peer reviewer for us.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi, everyone. I'm going to just spend a couple of minutes talking about my experience with the project, which hopefully might encourage some others to get involved. As Jordan said, I co-authored 2 chapters in the Legal Pathways to Deep Decarbonization book, one on the regulation of methane emissions and a second on the production and delivery of what we called low carbon gaseous fuels. So I won't spend much time on that, but just briefly, the low carbon gaseous fuels chapter looked at legal changes that are needed to facilitate the production and delivery of things like biogas, synthetic methane, and hydrogen that could be substituted for fossil natural gas in some of those hard to electrify sectors that Michael Gerrard mentioned. In drafting the chapter, myself and my co-author, Melinda Taylor, who's a professor at the University of Texas, went through a really, what we think is a sort of extensive research and consultation process. We spoke to scientists that are working, researching these fuels. We spoke to industry groups that represent producers. We spoke to pipeline operators and others that are involved in distribution to identify sort of what they see as key legal barriers to expanding the use of these substances and what reforms are needed. And we came up with a set of recommendations that we believe are very robust, and they are now being turned into model laws through the project that you've been hearing about. I've served as a peer reviewer for a number of the model laws developed through the Legal Pathways project. It's been a really great experience and one that I strongly recommend to people who are interested in contributing to the project in some way, but might feel like they don't have the time or the expertise to actually draft the model laws. Peer reviewing tends to be a relatively light lift. Marcy and the team are relatively flexible with deadlines, so you can sort of structure and fit the peer review work around your existing commitments. It's really an interesting experience to see the model laws come together. You're necessarily working on model laws where you already have a high level of familiarity and expertise. So it doesn't require a lot of research or sort of background work on your part. But it's a really great and interesting experience, and a great opportunity to network and meet other lawyers who are passionate about addressing climate change. So I've gotten to work with a number of lawyers really quite closely who, frankly, I would probably never have otherwise met except through this project. And it's really a rewarding and interesting experience. So one of those lawyers is Julia Kindlon, who's going to speak to you next. She is an associate at Arnold & Porter.
Thanks, Romany. Yes, I'm just going to talk briefly about my experience as a drafter of one of the model laws. I learned that Arnold & Porter was involved in this project sometime during my first few weeks at the firm, and I had really wanted to get involved in environmental pro bono work, so I jumped at the opportunity to be involved in drafting model climate laws. I was given a summary of the book with the key recommendations pulled out and got to choose from some of the available chapters, and I chose Romany's biogas chapter. And I was placed on a team with another associate and a partner at the firm who were also interested in this chapter. It was a great opportunity to meet new people at the firm, besides just all the new people in the LPDD project. And it was people, as Romany said, I wouldn't normally have had the opportunity to work with. And at the firm, we were actually all from different practice groups, but just all were really interested in helping with climate-specific pro bono work. Honestly, none of us really knew much about biogas going into this chapter. We had just read the chapter we were provided and chose which recommendation sounded the most interesting. And I was really excited to be able to learn about a new topic and really dive into a specific area. And one of the great things about this project is you get a lot of support. Rick sent us some background materials that had already been gathered on this chapter, and we also got the opportunity to have a phone call with Romany and ask her all of our questions. And that was really exciting because it's not all that often as a young lawyer that you get the chance to just read something and then call up the author and chat about the material. And she was able to point us to even more useful information to help us with our drafting. And the first step in drafting was sending Rick a template outlining what recommendation we were doing, what final product we would be creating, what materials we would be working off of, and when we plan to get him the final draft. And that's another perk of this project, is you get to set your own deadline and can make this project something that works with your schedule. And so Rick reviewed the templates to make sure we were on the right track, and we got to drafting. I worked on a model law for creating a renewable portfolio standard for renewable gas. There had been a proposed bill in California on this issue, so I was able to use that as a basis for my model law. And I also incorporated other research and feedback I got from Romany and my team. The draft then got sent for peer review, and I got another round of feedback and was able to check in with Romany again. And when that draft was finalized, I got the chance to review again and give final approval before it was published on the website. I was very excited to be able to help with climate-specific pro bono work that seemed like it could actually be something that would be useful at the state and national level. Overall, this is a really great project that I would highly recommend to anyone. It was an especially great project to be involved in as a young lawyer, because you get the opportunity to really take the lead on something and take responsibility for it while still having a big support system and getting the chance to work with experts who can assist you. And with that, I will pass it back to Rick to wrap up.
Well, thank you, Julia, and thank you, everyone. I will end just a closing point. Many firms, I mean, you may be concerned with conflicts. For example, you may represent a client in the fossil fuel industry, but what we have found is that with some 1,500 recommendations and more than 35 topics, nearly all firms have been able to select a recommendation that doesn't pose a conflict and fits well within their client base. Some firms have said, hey, there's no real conflict, but we do have a client that might be put off if they knew we were working on climate change matters. And we do have some firms that are working but want to remain anonymous. That's fine with us. We're very flexible. And while they're doing the work, they're getting the advantage of doing that work. We're keeping their names confidential. Finally, you can see there are many reasons to get involved. There's the usual pro bono benefits, but there's also an opportunity for lawyers to develop skills in legislative drafting. Unless you're at many firms, there aren't many opportunities to actually draft laws. This is one. And the other advantage, of course, is you've heard from lawyers who have been involved in the process and I think are really enthusiastic about it and have gotten real benefit from the project. So with that, let me turn it over to John and we will take questions. John?
Well, thank you, Rick. It's about 10 of, and so we have, say, 5 to 7 minutes for questions, something like that. There was a question early on about access to the slides, and I think there's Doug Quirk provided a link on that, so you should be able to have that. If you do have questions, though, we'd like to see them in the Q&A function, and we'd be happy to take them. I'm just going to stop talking for a little bit and see if anybody has anything. But maybe while we do, I should ask anybody else on our panel if there's some other point you want to make while we wait for questions that perhaps didn't get fully stated while we were making our presentations.
Well, let me just say one thing, that there's obviously a tremendous amount of activity at the federal level, as we heard yesterday from President Biden's announcement and so forth. And quite a number of bills have been introduced in Congress, and Congress has robust bill drafting capabilities. So we think that most of the focus these days ought to be at the state and local levels. Most state legislatures and city councils don't have nearly the staffs and so forth to do all of this. And we think that there is in many states and many cities a good deal of receptivity to these kinds of recommendations. So that's where a lot of the focus of our work these days is.
So there's a question now in the Q&A function. Have any jurisdictions adopted laws based on the model laws?
We know that there are a couple that are now actively considering it, but I don't think any have actually been enacted yet.
I mean, my sense of it is that this is a resource that people are still getting used to. And like a lot of other things, we've sort of gone from with this project, well, what's the next state overdoing, to here's a boatload of choices. And our sense is that as people get to know the resource better and as people learn it, that we're going to get greater uptake. A lot of the model laws have only been available for, say, 6 months. It took us a while after publishing the book to get that.
Yeah, John, let me add to that, I mean, the website has been up for less than a year. I know we have had some real interest by legislators and legislatures, and we're interacting with them. Let me add one other thing. About a year ago, I think it was, John, we did have a particular representative reach out to us and ask whether he could have assistance. This was a representative in Congress, have assistance in drafting a bill on methane. we put them in touch with a law firm with deep expertise in the methane area, and who had and a partner in that firm who had drafted legislation in the past. He assisted in drafting a methane bill. I think that bill was introduced in Congress, but of course it was during the Trump administration, so it obviously didn't get adopted. That's sort of a variation on a theme where we actually have, there are circumstances where the drafter might want, if as appropriate, to work with the legislator to get something specific or to tweak the model.
Yeah, you refresh my recollection on that, to use a random phrase from law, but what I remember about that particular effort was that we involved Romany Webb talking directly with the legislator and with that, I think with the folks at that law firm. Romany, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just say, as a contributor to the project, it was really a unique experience to be able to work directly with legislators like that on a bill that is ultimately introduced into Congress. So that's a really great learning experience, I think, for lawyers. Also, I would say there was, at that point, the Model Laws website actually hadn't been launched yet. It was launched just after the bill was introduced. And when the website launched, there was a huge amount of interest and enthusiasm from that legislator and his staffers in exploring other model laws that were compiled on the website and looking at other opportunities to make use of them. So this project, I think, is definitely, that's an example of just how much impact this project is having, and it's actually sort of generating attention and interest from people in the right places who can have real impact.
As many of the folks on this call, I'm sure, know quite well, you don't get legislation adopted overnight. It takes time, and there's a significant process. But we continue to be hopeful that having this many options developed at this level of sophistication will lead to some decent number of future adoptions. I guess we're operating on the "if you build it, they will come" principle.
And not to put a damper on anybody's sense of reward from this, but it's also true that we don't put a tracking device on these. So if we put up something that is suitable for a small municipality to increase charging infrastructure where they have existing street lighting, they won't necessarily write us a thank you note if they end up using that idea or even our exact language. It's very much let out into the universe.
Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions.
John, let me raise something that is certainly on point, but different than what we were just talking about, and that is what I have found as sort of the head of drafting is that, not surprisingly, young lawyers are really passionate about this and passionate about climate change. And I've seen firms really provide a terrific opportunity for young lawyers to get involved in doing something for climate change. Young associates and also summer associates. So I've seen a number of firms for their summer program use this as an opportunity for summer associates to do pro bono, to address climate change, and actually do something that addresses climate change through drafting legislation, which I mentioned earlier is not something that you typically find a young lawyer in a law firm doing. So I think it provides a terrific opportunity for young lawyers and is a great option for pro bono groups within law firms to give meaningful work to their lawyers.
Well, thanks, Rick. I think that's a great way to conclude. I guess the only thing that I would add before we all say goodbye to you and let you get on to the next part of your program is that one of the really wonderful things about this particular effort is that you get to work with good people, all of whom are shown here. Actually, there are other people who are also good who are not shown here, but it's a lot of it's a lot of really good people, and it's a good experience to work with these folks. We hope you'll join us, and we hope to hear from you. Our sense is, one of the things that drove us to this is our feeling is that we're a little overrepresented on the East Coast in this project, and we're hoping to get more people from your part of the world. So thank you so much. Have a great day. Have a great program, and have a great weekend.